everybody, thanks for joining us. And I have the privilege of talking to Dr. Sriram Rajamani this morning or this afternoon. We are delighted to have him here and ask him to give his thoughts. We'd really appreciate. We want to make this session interactive. Dr. Rajamani is the distinguished scientist and managing director for Microsoft Research Labs. But he's been at Microsoft for so many years, and Microsoft, as some of you know, is one of the world's most admired companies, which is doing a lot of work in the space of technology and technology for good. He has been a fellow. He's been awarded with multiple awards. He has worked as an academician and has done a lot of work in the space. His research lab, they've been building solutions for India. Dr. Rajamani did his PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley and is also a part of the Plaksha academic advisory board. I would invite Dr. Rajamani to share some of his thoughts this afternoon. It's an interesting conversation. He and I were chatting this morning, and I asked him to really pivot and tell us a little bit of how technology is going to play its role for good, for education, for healthcare, and so all the things that Plaksha stands for today. And for this audience which is listening to all of us, it will be interesting to get your thoughts, your comments, and your questions, and we'll do that towards the end of this session. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rajamani to really share with us his thoughts for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll quiz him together on a bunch of things this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohit. It's always such a pleasure to participate in Plaksha's events. This is, I think, the third talk I'm giving to the Plaksha audience, and today I'm especially happy that the parents and students, young students, are also attending. Let me share my screen if that's actually possible first, so that I can actually show my slides. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So Mohit and I were talking earlier this morning, and so today I'm going to talk about technology and technology for good. That's the topic of my conversation. But before I go to technology for good, right, one should recognize that cloud and AI is causing such a huge disruption, technological disruption in the world today. Even if you think commercially, right? Now, if you don't think about business, right? Be it accessing the world's information, searching, be it improving productivity, business intelligence, connecting customers and business together so that business actually understands what customers actually want, what tweaks we need to products in order to improve our sales. Be it automation, ranging from automation at the in manufacturing to automation in productivity industry, in business processes, right? And the enormous democratization that the public cloud, is bringing to access to computing resources, so that anybody, like 3 students sitting in Bangalore can now do a startup that accesses expensive GPU resources to the extent that they want, right? And they can pay for it as they use. So these are the times that we live in, where technology is causing such a huge disruption. But as Mohit was talking about, we're not going to talk about business today. We are talking about how technology is used for good, right? And I'm actually especially proud to work for a company like Microsoft, which takes this very, very seriously. Taking how AI and cloud can actually help all of us. And these are the set of programs that we have. Let me see if I can actually minimize my Yeah, maybe that's better. That way you can actually see my whole slides. Yeah, we have programs ranging from AI for Earth, which is a program committed to using these kinds of technologies focused on agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, water, AI for accessibility, which is the use of AI and cloud technologies to help people with disabilities in their daily life, employment, communication, connection, AI for humanitarian action, which is a commitment to help various organizations with disaster response, helping refugees and displaced people, human rights, needs for children, A for cultural heritage, which is about empowering people to preserve and enrich cultural heritage, A for health, which is not only about discovery of new health treatments, but ensuring that there is access to health for disadvantaged and underprivileged people. Enormously inspiring programs. I mean, just to give you a sense, right? These things are not just words. I mean, the company is putting on the order of close to $200 million on these programs, and that's the amount of money the company is spending on these things. I'll switch from that into this slide that in which I don't know how many of you have read this book. It's a very interesting book by N. Chandrasekharan and Rupa Purushothaman. And N. Chandrasekharan, as you know, is the leader of Tata Sons. And the interesting thing about the book is actually its subtitle, which is Solving Technology's People Problem, where I have some quotes from this book here, where the goal is to not to talk about technologies for technology's sake, but technology in context, applied in ways that make sense to people. And this is especially true for India with such a demographic advantage with 1.3 billion people, where the conversation is actually if we can combine people with technology, can we make sure that the combination benefits really all our citizens? Right. So this is the thrust of the book. And if you haven't read it, right, I really recommend it. It's a wonderful book. And what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about two specific stories from our lab in Microsoft Research India and Bangalore, where we have been really living these principles. One in the context of safe driving, and one in the context of tuberculosis medication adherence. And then we'll step back and do some questions like Mohit was referring to. So let me go and get started with the two stories. Right. The first story I'm going to talk about is on safe driving. Let me just do a quick check. Right. Everybody can still hear me, right?
Yes, we
and
can.
See my screen. Okay, sounds good.
We can.
Yeah. So the first question we're going to talk about is actually, can we use technology to improve safe driving? But before we talk about why we need that, let's just look at some stats. Road deaths are a major health epidemic. Right? It is traffic deaths are the top 10 causes of global deaths. In 2019 alone, right, our country, India, has had 1.5 lakh deaths due to road accidents. And these are key risk factors: speed, drinking and driving, not wearing appropriate harnesses, helmets, distracted driving, talking on the cell phone while driving. These are some of the key reasons why there are so many traffic deaths in India. In the West, people think about self-driving cars as the answer. But even in the West, it's going to be a while. I mean, here are some projections here. It's going to be at least another 30 or 40 years before self-driving cars become popular. And in India, it's going to take even longer. So drivers matter, and they're not going to disappear anytime soon. So can we use AI not to replace drivers, but to help drivers drive better? So that is one of the goals. We started a project called HAMS. HAMS stands for Harnessing Automobiles for Safety, where the goal is actually to put a smartphone before your windshield, so that the smartphone has two cameras, one that sees the driver and then one that sees the field of view, and together with the onboard sensors and the other kinds of sensors, OBD sensors in the car, can we now get a 360-degree picture of what's going on both inside the car and outside the car, and use that to enable drivers to drive safely? And there are many, many applications. We could use it for training drivers. We could use it for driver license testing. We're already doing that for monitoring fleets and so on. And where we can use AI is using the camera that faces a driver to detect if the driver is fatigued. If they're using a phone, watching the field of view to check whether a driver is approaching obstacles too quickly whether they are accelerating even in front of an obstacle, tailgating, whether they are actually parking properly, whether they are actually observing speed limits. There are many, many things we can use computer vision and artificial intelligence to do. And using these kinds of technologies, we could do many, many applications. We could think about training drivers. We could think about testing, like when you go to an RTO, can we automate a driver's licensing test? When you have fleets, right, be it Ola or Uber or Shell or any Ashok Leyland, any company that actually administers fleets, can we actually monitor the fleets? And then the whole point actually is to use AI to work with humans rather than replace them. So let me show you an example. The example I'm going to show you is this technology is already deployed for license testing in Dehradun. Today, if you go to Dehradun, right, and you go to the RTO and take a driver license test, the test is done by this system. So let me show you that.
The government of Uttarakhand is very proud to start this initiative where we are using based to do this driver testing.
Dr. Sriram, the audio is not coming
clear. We are also very happy to have partnered with Microsoft and IDTR to take this initiative forward, and I'm sure we'll be able to deliver some world-class services in a transparent manner to our citizens.
Yeah, so you saw that there. So we started going live in the Dehradun RTO sometime last year. And till date, I think more than 8,000 license tests have been conducted in Dehradun alone. And you can now see various RTOs across the country that are now interested in conversations with us. We are also working with Ola, which is, as you know, the largest cab aggregator in India. And we are trying to use this kind of technology for Ola's own driver testing for safety. And even actually, we are thinking about doing it as ongoing safety tests as Ola drivers drive the cars in the roads. One interesting fact that I found was that in Dehradun, the pass percentage is only 50%. We actually fail 50% of the people. But even the people that are failing are actually giving us good feedback, saying, this was very useful for me. Even though the test was not successful, I knew what mistake I made. Actually, it'll improve my driving performance. So I could come back tomorrow and I could become a better driver and I could also pass the test, right? So it brings sort of transparency inside the system. And we've been also receiving interest from Netherlands, all these different countries. And I think we are getting increasingly confident that this kind of technology is not just useful for self-driving cars, but it's also useful for driver-driven cars, human-driven cars, to improve safety. So that's the first story I'll talk about. The second story I'll talk about is using technology to help eradicate tuberculosis. Here, the story is TB is another disease that kills more than 100,000 people in India every year. The total number of tuberculosis deaths, if you look in 200 years, it's a huge number. It's 10 to the power 9, and it dwarfs the number of deaths that had happened due to smallpox or malaria or AIDS, for example. And I mean, TB is caused by a bacterium. Unlike COVID, we are all facing COVID. COVID is caused by a virus, and bacterial diseases are actually treatable by antibiotics. And so TB has actually antibiotics, but the real difficulty with TB antibiotics is the duration of treatment. You have to take treatment for 6 months, and that's a difficult thing to do. And many people don't take medication for 6 months. Maybe they don't know, and they start feeling better, and the medication has toxic side effects. So people just stop taking medication after a few months, and then that leads to drug-resistant TB, which is both contagious and fatal. It's going to kill that person, and it's also going to kill because the bacterium is going to mutate. And anybody who contacts the disease from this person is also going to have drug-resistant TB. So the World Health Organization prescribes a treatment regimen called DOTS. DOTS stand for directly observed therapy, where the healthcare worker and the patient meet every day. And the healthcare worker records the fact that the patient has taken the antibiotic, and they have to do this for 6 months. And this is the only surefire way we know to cure TB. But of course, this is so inconvenient, both for the healthcare provider and the patient. It is such a loss of productivity for them to meet every day. Many of these are, migrant people, people who live in remote areas. For them to travel and meet is such a difficult thing to do. So 99 dots is a technology that we developed in our lab, whose goal is to get 99% of the efficiency of dots with 1% of the effort. Right, and then the remaining 99% is actually going to come from amplification due to technology. And this is how the system works. We work with pill manufacturers, drug manufacturers, and we design a special pill pack such that when the patient dispenses the medication, you see a hidden number into which the patient is counseled to give a free call. So as soon as the patient has the pill, they are counseled to give a free call at this number. And so every envelope has a unique sequence of these numbers, and using some coding theory and the combination of the caller ID and the numbers, when the call comes, we know who is making the call. There are some algorithms that run on the cloud side that we can use to calculate, who is making this call. And using that and analytics, we can create a dashboard for each patient. So, this green means that the calls have come, and the red means the call has not come. So when a call doesn't come, then a lot of things trigger. We send an SMS first to that person saying, please take your pills. If you still don't hear from them for a few more days, we send an SMS to the healthcare worker saying some of your patients have missed healthcare doses. And then we do counseling. And then we can see that people come back on treatment, and then they can continue their drug regimen. And this project has been going on for 5 years. It has now been field tested. It is now part of the national strategic plan for tuberculosis elimination that was proposed by Prime Minister Modi's government a couple of years ago. It is also now part of the World Health Organization's handbook. You can see, this is actually 99 dots is part of how the WHO thinks about medication adherence for TB. So we've had many presentations in media about this, and here you can see JP Nadda, the Union Health Minister at that time, launching. So today in India, it is actually mandatory in 6 states. 6 states have a mandatory use of 99 dots. If you go to YouTube, you can actually even see Amitabh Bachchan talking about 99 dots. I think that's perhaps the only project from our lab that Amitabh Bachchan, I think, has talked about. He's Satya talking about it, and here you can see Bill Gates endorsing it and so on. What is also interesting is how these projects scale outside the lab. This project at some point it became too large to be run out of the lab, so we spun out a separate startup company called Everwell Health. It's now based in Bangalore. Andrew Cross, who was one of the people behind 99 dots, is now CEO of Everwell. So now more than 250,000 patients are using 99 dots. But and you can sort of see the graph by which the growth of 99 dots. It's now actually working in 15 countries. I think it's now maybe even 17, and you can sort of see the places where actually this is now spreading. It's now part of WHO's standard of care. The other interesting thing that happened is that the Everwell started building a digital platform for 99 dots, but now the government of India has asked Everwell to expand its digital platform to cover more and more TB digital transformation. So Everwell is now expanding beyond 99 dots to various other aspects of tuberculosis medication and tuberculosis treatment, spanning several other programs beyond 99 dots that are being done by the Indian government, including, for example, direct benefit transfer. Now, direct benefit transfer, where TB patients are now given cash, the cash actually now flows through this software pipeline for many millions of Indians. So those are the 2 projects that I want to talk about as a case study. But I would say also that Microsoft Research, which is the lab that I work in India, we work in 4 topics, and this is not the only topic we work in. We work in algorithms and data science, machine learning and artificial intelligence. We work in systems, and this is the 4th area, which we call as technologies for emerging markets. And over the past 15 years, I mentioned 99 dots and HAMS, but we've been working on illiteracy, understanding literacy and semi-literacy, and how should software and hardware be designed so that illiterate and semi-literate people can actually use and benefit from the software? How can we use these kinds of technologies for transparency, making sure that there is no corruption? Where can we help agriculture? We've done a bunch of work on education. Mohit mentioned that. We can talk more about that. Incidentally, I think Vineet and I have been talking about collaborations between Microsoft Research and Plaksha in the space of technologies for education. We could talk about that. We've done a bunch of work in employment and empowerment, connectivity. I mean, it's a very important thing in India. Most of us that live in cities take internet connectivity for granted. But if you go to rural areas, that is still an issue. How to do that? So we could talk about many of those kinds of things. But since we are a lab, right, in addition to doing these projects, we also step back and think about insights and body of knowledge that we can create. Thinking about frugal innovation, where we combine, in each of these examples, you can see that how you combine low-cost technology with social engineering and people. Thinking about technology as an amplifier, but not as a substitute or a replacement for human ability, right? Thinking about users, thinking about how constraints like literacy affect users. How do you need to design interfaces for users, taking these into account? Now, what good it is if you have the highest bandwidth connectivity and a coolest smartphone, if you don't have the literacy to benefit from that? Thinking about needs and aspirations of people, distinction between needs and wants. The most important thing as a scientific endeavor, if you come up with an intervention like 99 dots, does it really work? Just like the pharma companies do field trials right now, like for COVID, there's field trials going on in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 on whether the vaccine is actually effective. We do similar such studies for 99 dots, right? We think very objectively as to whether it's actually useful or not useful. So all of this is actually very important to think about this as science and do real science. So I will conclude, going back to this slide where technology has tremendous promise to help in many walks of life as people, than just merely optimization for business and increasing profits. So I will just stop there and go back and then let Mohit and you ask me questions and have a conversation.
So, Dr. Sriram, thank you so much for this conversation and giving us your thoughts here. I am going to open up to the group for Q&A in a bit, but I have some questions for you.
Okay.
Right, and I mean, you talked about how Microsoft, and as you read a lot, Microsoft really is creating and building technology which is really cutting edge, and then they're really trying to solve for what actually we believe in our whole cultural ethos of Plaksha is about. How do you really build up, how do you manage what we call the fourth industrial revolution changes, right? And then solving some of India's grand challenges, right? I mean, we have parents, young students here, and teachers who are actually in their own way are trying to make an impact in as you build the new India, right? And clearly, one of our objectives as Plaksha has always been that how do you solve for issues like healthcare, education, and agriculture, right? And things like those. And today, in the last 6-9 months, the pandemic has really accelerated the digital curve completely. What we would have not thought about it changing in the next 10 years. And at Plaksha, we believe that we will help drive and accelerate that digital curve and the technology curve even faster, because we are at a unique point where we do not have a legacy, and we are now starting with a clean slate of white paper, and we can really redesign, reimagine what we want to do. And that was the ethos and the thinking about Plaksha, saying how they can reimagine education. I'm sure a lot of kids, academia, and parents who might be listening today have these questions of how education is going to change. I know Microsoft has done a lot of work, and we don't want to talk about education only in the larger cities, right? We want to take education to down in smaller cities, tier 3, tier 4 kind of cities. Would love to get your perspective of how Microsoft Research Labs and Microsoft on its own thinks about enabling just not Plaksha, but people like Plaksha to evangelize and take education to different parts of the country. And there are a lot of people who might be on this call from different parts of India. And I think it'll be good for them to hear you and your thoughts from a technology perspective and how technology is going to really change the game there as we look at the next 10 to 15 years.
So thank you, Mohit, for that question. I think, what is most challenging about, even if you just take education as a topic, right, is the diversity of problems that come up depending on the demographic that you talk about, right? So if I'm sure actually, I don't quite know the demographic of students and parents in this call, but my guess is actually most of them are from cities, from relatively affluent schools. There actually the challenges are of one type. But if you go to tier 2, tier 3, there is even a scarcity of teachers, right? There's scarcity of equipment, scarcity of technology, scarcity of everything, right? So how do you do that? Let me just give you 2 or 3 examples. About 10 years ago or so, we had a project called Digital Study Hall, and you can look that up on the internet. The whole point there was to see whether we can amplify the ability of a teacher. Like suppose you have a school in tier 2 or tier 3 where you don't really have a qualified teacher. You only have quote unquote a teaching assistant. That is all that you have.
Yeah.
Can you now use mediated instruction, right? Where you play recorded videos by somebody else from the city, but this person administers and does this blended learning, where
Absolutely.
This teacher is also learning along with the students. Now they stop, they have a discussion, they do that. We have done studies like that. It's incredibly interesting studies we have done. The other thing I can tell you, another one that I can tell you, Mohit, is that in affluent schools, right, now there's a notion of clickers that come. Like, for example, one of the reasons why clickers are used, a lot of the universities in the US use it because when the teacher asks a question, right, it's usually the dominant kids that put up the hand and give the answer. And mostly it's boys, right? The people that are shy, women in particular, they just don't even participate actually in talking back actually to the teachers, right? So how does a teacher even understand what fraction of my class is understanding what I'm saying, right? Yeah. So for that, clickers are used. So basically the teacher now asks a question and everybody clicks an answer and the teacher gets a summary. So the teacher knows actually how many students understand that, right? So imagine going to a rural school. How are you going to put clickers there, right? So we did a project called Cue Cards where everybody is given a card. The card has 4 answers, A, B, C, D, right? Depending on that, you rotate the card and keep it like that. And then a camera just looks at it and the camera can identify how many of the students are answering correctly, right? So this is actually a low-cost way to get feedback from students. So the third thing I will talk about is actually Vineet and I have been talking, together with another colleague of mine, Sumit Gulwani, to think about how we can use AI to improve programming education. Right? When you do teach programming, how can we make sure that we give personalized assistance to kids who learn programming, depending on how they understand, right? So these are, the spectrum is very, very large, as you can see.
Thank you. I have a question from Dr. Khan. A question is, technology penetration is from top to bottom strata of society. How will we change this flow? Basically, he's questioning how will we inverse the pyramid, right? Because right now the pyramid is, the way the pyramid is, how do you make it stand on its head so that technology flows not from top to bottom, but from bottom to top? And you alluded to the question about our villages and, expanding into different rural parts of India, right? And with now fiber and bandwidth and telecom becoming quite active. How do you see that play out? But still, look at it. Some places we still don't have networks and bandwidths the way it should be. How do you see that? Do you see that? How do you see that changing over the next few years? And what's your thought process on that?
First of all, I think connectivity is improving enormously, right? And it's growing at a very, very rapid pace. So that I think is a good thing. But I think regardless of connectivity, right? I think one of the things I think we need to think about quite carefully is what is the benefit that you're actually giving to people? Why should somebody in Chhattisgarh,
Yeah.
why should they go seek out being part of the digital economy, right? And of course, actually, one of the biggest learnings from our lab is the distinction between needs and wants, right?
Mhm.
A lot of us, who are privileged, think about, when we think about technology, we have to help people with healthcare, or we have to, help people with education. I mean, those are thoughts, right? But when you talk to poor, underprivileged people, right, they have aspirations like the rest of us. They want to have entertainment. They want to have jobs. They want to, buy things. So I think those are like, those kinds of things create pull from people. So to give you a particular example, right, one of the projects that we're doing in our lab is called Karya. And Karya is about dignified digital labor. Can we now take people in second and third tier cities and let them learn a livelihood using digital labor? Now, Mohit, when we were talking this morning, you were talking about gig work and gig economy and so on, right? Can we actually create a gig economy where people that live in second and third tier cities can participate and actually earn a livelihood? Right, the government of India has a program called MNREGA, where you can actually earn money by doing physical labor, right? Can we similarly enable digital labor? And this digital
Yeah.
labor is very important because only through digital labor we can actually create data for low resource languages. For example, right, AI now works for English, it works for German, it works for Chinese. It is starting to work for Hindi, it's going to starting to work for Tamil, Telugu,
Tamil.
languages in which there is money, right? But if you actually take a language like Gondi, which is actually spoken in Chhattisgarh, where is the incentive for somebody to create training data for that, to onboard Gondi into the digital highway, right? Something like gig work to do that, so that the people who speak Gondi can help bootstrap Gondi on that and make money during the process, right? So we have to think like that so that we make difference to people's lives, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Really helpful. So one question for me, and then I'm going to switch it back to a question which is coming up from our group here. Plaksha believes that the future is also about research, right? You run Microsoft Research in India, and research is going to be very critical and important, right? I mean, world over, we've seen great institutes and institutions have got built because they've built great products, great research, great technology, and there's so much to be done. And in India requires a lot more research capability than it has today. One of Plaksha's mission is to build deep research capability within our own environment in our campus coming up in Mohali. And this is also for the students and everybody who are listening, that we are wanting to build and do some cutting edge research. Having said that, I would love to get your perspective. Microsoft does a lot of work in research, right? Right now, you all using AI, machine learning, IoT are doing so much of work even on COVID-19 around the world. Microsoft has done so much work in healthcare, whether it is for glaucoma, for iris, whether it is for even people who are blind, in for heart. There's so much of work Microsoft does, both on the healthcare side, agri side, and various other areas, right? In an environment which is so dear to the younger generation of today, that we want to live in a more clean environment. How do you see, and what would you suggest to us as Plaksha and to people who are listening about the importance of research and encouraging young talent to really building products and doing research and collaborating with academic institutions like us and corporates like yours who are investing so much in research? We'd love to get some of your thoughts on that as well, because that's so much of core and center of what we want to do at Plaksha.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I have actually found as a very interesting difference between my experience in the United States, where I studied and lived for over 15 years, and since then I've now been back in India for over 15 years, is that the circulation of people between academia and industry in India is not as much as it actually happens in the US. I mean, I went to grad school at Berkeley. I see the number of people that do startups out of Berkeley or Stanford, go back and forth between Silicon Valley and the academia. It is just not just ideas, right? It's also people that move back and forth. So one observation I have is that in India, we need that circulation of people. I think once we have circulation of people, right, the ideas will also flow, between academia and industry. So we need many more people going back and forth, and it happens much more in the West than in India. And I think Mohit, when I talk to you and when I talk to Vineet, it's really admirable that you think about the connection between academia and industry as integral part of Plaksha. And I think the more universities do that in India, I think the more we stand to gain as a society. The second thing I will mention, Mohit, is that for students, young students in India who are thinking about what they might want to do in terms of research and science, as they build their careers, my own experience in Microsoft Research India has been that really there are, you can think about two kinds of work that you can do. If you are, the internet is a great leveler. Because of the internet, right, you can actually access anything, right? Every conference you can actually now attend. Access is now not a problem.
Yeah.
I think it's important that a country like India, people just really understand the state of the art, right? And be at the leading edge of things, without worrying about applications. I think it's very important to do that because you have to be at the state of the art, right? Science works by pushing the state of the art, right? So you have to do that. You have to also actually think about how that knowledge is actually applicable to our problems, like agriculture, healthcare. You have to do both, right? The reason why you have to do both is that interesting breakthroughs happen in between fields. Right? Knowledge happens when serendipitously a really brilliant idea, which may be applicable only in the West, suddenly has an application. Maybe technology has changed. We can now run the same machine learning algorithm in a small form factor with low cost. And that's actually going to cause a disruption, right? So one suggestion I would give is to not box yourself ahead of time, saying, oh, I'm actually going to work only on India-related things, or I'm actually going to work on only... as a young person, be open. Be open to future possibilities. Study everything. Study what catches your fancy, right? And go after knowledge, and have diversity of people working on Western problems, Indian problems, all of them, and have them talk to each other. That's been my experience in the lab in India. If you do that, right, surprising things come up.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have one question more by Ayush Bhatnagar. I think he's trying to understand from you, what do you think about the convergence of blockchain and AI? Will both of their intersection be the fourth industrial revolution? So I think that's a little bit. I think what he's trying to understand from you is that the convergence of blockchain and AI and the intersection of that. Does it do something different, or they are very different things, or in parallelly working together to solve for different use cases and different issues around the world?
I mean, they are really two different things, right? That's the bottom line. See, blockchain is actually used as a distributed ledger to have an immutable record of what happens, right? Suppose you have 3 or 4 businesses are interacting with each other, and suppose you need to have a record of actually what transactions have happened, in between these businesses, in such a way that will hold water in a court of law. I mean, there's no question that somebody has tampered this ledger, so that if there is a dispute, the judge can look at, the sequence of things that have happened and then interpret the law, right? So that's actually what blockchain is used for. So in some sense, like, blockchain is what lets you get the intermediary out, right? Now, previously, before you had the blockchain, right, in order to do these things, you needed to have an intermediary who trusts and that you trust and do these kinds of things. It sort of creates an agency to do that. Now we can do that with technology. In that sense, actually, blockchain democratizes these kinds of contracts between people I think AI is doing a different kind of democratization, right? It is actually, doing, automating things that in computer vision, in accessing information, improving productivity, and so on. So I sort of really think about them as two different things, both improving, both quite important. But I don't think the merger of them is going to do something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. I don't think so. I mean, these are two different things, and I think pushing both of them is going to help.
Yeah, I agree with you, because some of us have been involved with AI and blockchain. Blockchain obviously solves for different problems. In fact, some of the underlying technology could be derived from what AI technologies are, so the way AI is built today. Um, I don't have any questions coming from the group, but I do have, I want to just say, and I maybe have a question as well here, for if you look at it, what Microsoft does, and I'm sure a lot of young children and folks on this call have an aspiration to be at Microsoft one day, right? Or work with Microsoft, or innovate, or do things with Microsoft. You guys are really on the very different cutting edge of what Microsoft does, and since Satya took over, it's a very different company. Um, one advice to these youngsters as they look at taking the next step in their lives and becoming technologists, or studying technology, or studying all the interesting courses in the future. What one advice you would want to give them? Would you want to give them in terms of as they step into getting out of school and getting into college in the next 12 to 18 months? What would be your one advice, as you've seen so much happening both in the US and India?
Yeah. So I would say, for a student that is starting out now, the number one advice I would give is actually plan for a career over 30, 40 years, right? That means that if you look at computing, right, by the time you graduate, I mean, to give you a sense, right, I did my undergrad in Gindi Engineering College in Chennai. I graduated in 1991. The first computer that I used actually was a mainframe with a punched card. That's the computer that I used, actually. That's the first program that I wrote. And look at actually how computers are look today. You should fully anticipate that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the whole tech landscape is going to be dramatically different from the tech landscape you are facing today. So my number one advice I would give to students is actually concentrate on the basics. Concentrate on math, concentrate on basics of technology, and understand concepts behind technology in addition to its manifestations. I mean, of course, you can build the next Android app or iOS app. That's a good thing to do because it helps you be more practical. But step back and understand the principles behind these kinds of things so that your career can weather the changes that are going to happen in technology 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Right? I mean, that's actually number one advice that actually I would give to students. They think really long haul. And the other thing is actually, really value expertise. In whatever you do it sincerely and be curious, and ask questions, and be not satisfied with answers if the answers don't make sense to you. Go after them, right? Yeah. Because it is the curiosity is really the only thing you have, and that's the only asset that all of us have, and that's the mother of everything, right? So those would be the two things I would say.
Yeah. I fully endorse what you're saying. Curiosity is the most important thing. Even where we are and at our age, I want to learn every day. You have to be curious about things every day. I have one very interesting question Nalini has asked. I think it's very pertinent to today's times. And that will be our last question to you before we wrap this session. How could we bring this transformation in lateral workforce in the industry? I mean, the graduates who joined a year or 2 years back in companies, right? So there are people who joined last year, and there are kids who joined the corporate world this year, right? This year, they joined in the middle of the pandemic. Last year, they joined just before the pandemic, right? And there is so much shift now happening in the world, and how work is done and how work is administered, and things are happening. How any thoughts on that, right? Because that's a massive thought process shift that all of us, even who've been working for 30 years in our lives, have to repivot.
Yeah.
And you must have seen this in Microsoft a lot, right? And Microsoft even just announced that they are saying everybody can work from home, you know, till whenever they want to work. If they want to come to office, that's fine. How are you? How do you think that headset and mindset will need to change as you think about now and the future for all these youngsters who join companies or organizations?
So Mohit, right, the number one thing that I think it's becoming more and more clear to me with every passing day is that learning has to be lifelong, right? Gone are the days like, our parents had a lifestyle where you go to college, you finish studying, and then you start working. And then
Yeah,
you work typically in the same job, right? And you
yeah.
get better and better at it. You help your community, help, your children, your parents. See, this kind of linear progression is just obsolete right now, right? Learning has to be lifelong. If you join the industry, it doesn't mean that your learning is over, because the technologies that you're working on today are going to be obsolete. Even 5 years down the line, you're going to have new technology, right? So I think universities like Plaksha, I think, have a great opportunity to imagine lifelong learning, where after your students graduate, right, they should be in touch back with universities. They should contribute back, and the universities actually should teach them more. And I think this flow of people, between academia and industry has to be really, really continuous. I think it's so important to do that. And I think both the industry and the academia stand to gain by doing that.
Thank you so much. I know we are on time. Really appreciate you taking this 45 minutes to talk to us on a Saturday afternoon. We're not going to keep you away from your lunch and everybody else on this panel, but I really, really appreciate you coming and talking to the group. I really thank everyone who logged in. We had over 100 people who were listening to you a while ago. Some of them maybe went for an early lunch. We're down to 90, but really appreciate you coming and talking to the group here. And I'm going to hand it over back to Palvi to close the morning session today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohit. Yeah.